say a few words about Citizens Alliance for Property Rights.
I want you guys to know that when we set up the meeting place, it hadn't been advertised in Capital Press, and I'm sure that's why so many people are here, and I'm thankful you're here. So we didn't know this many people were going to be here when we set up the meeting room. So I just wanted to give you that information. I want to explain, Citizens Alliance for Property Rights was set up in King County with the 65-10 rule, where they were going to take 65% of people's property and not let them touch it. And so Steve Hammond started a property rights group there. And as a result, we now have 17 chapters in 19 counties, both in Washington and California. And I just want to read the counties that are involved: Pierce, King, Jefferson, San Juan, Island County, Skagit, Whatcom, Spokane, Ponderay, Grant, Clallam, Thurston. In California, we have San Francisco Bay, San Diego with Orange County, Plumas, Sierra, Ventura, and Kings, Talon. I don't know where that is. And so we have a large group, and we do like you guys to pay dues, if you will. For students, unfortunately, we need more young people, but it's only $15 for student dues. And then $35 for individual dues, $50 for family. You can pay up to $1,000. And if you join the legal fund, that's all tax deductible. So you can give them as much money as you want for the legal fund. Also in Oregon, we have Oregonians in Action. That is a group that has been very busy over the years. And they were our speaker last year at the National Dinner for CAPR. And in Idaho, we have Northwest Property Owners Alliance in Northern Idaho. And then we have a very active group also in Montana. They are not part of CAPR, but they are also fighting the exact same things that we're fighting right here on the water issues. Montana is exactly in the same boat that we are, and we need to keep in contact with them so that we keep our property rights. One other thing I wanted to mention was there is a really good way to support CAPR. There is a thing called Amazon Smile. So when you buy your things on Amazon, you can say that your favorite charity is CAPR, and a little bit of money will go to CAPR, every single purchase that you make. And I think that's one of the best ideas I've ever heard of. And we can thank Scott Schock out of King County for that. If you want to join, go to CAPR, CAPR.us, or ask me, and I will give you a form to fill out. $35 individual, $50 for family. So thank you.
CAPR National just had their convention in Seattle. They have lots of workshops and stuff, and it's a good place to network on the state level. And they just had it. And I'm going to ask Connie Cooper-Smith, who attended that event, to stand up and just give us a little guideline on what you saw at that event.
Basically, they worked on water and how to be a citizen activist, and Stephen Nugabar had a presentation on science behind the wetland buffers, which was quite interesting, and some of that you can see on YouTube, or if you go to the CAPR website, you can see that. Then they had water rights, their basis in law, and how they're implemented. And they talked some about the tribes and how they're affecting our water, and the fact that Skagit, in the Skagit area, the 450 homes lost their water because of a Supreme Court decision. And there's an agreement so that they can keep using the water for now, but it's going to have to go to the federal court, the U.S. Supreme Court, and because it's going to have to go there, it'll be about 10 years before some of those people can sell their property because they don't really have the right to their water. So it's important that we get active now. They talked about becoming citizen ninjas and basically reading the paper, listening to the news, and if you find anything out about water that's bothering you, contact Ecology, find out what the real scoop is. If you want to do that, contact people in your area, contact your commissioners, because the most important thing is that we have the right advice and we know how to use it. We don't want to be uninformed, and all of us need our voice. Everybody has a right to voice, and that's what this was all about, is what is your voice on water, because without water, your property isn't worth anything. And you can't farm either.
Thank you. Well, I went to a city planning meeting, county planning meeting, I'm sorry, and I met Rusty there. And he was very cordial, and he wanted to be helpful, and we sort of chatted a little. And about, a month and a half ago, Rusty called me and he said, do you think your CAPR group would like to host me? And I'd like to talk a little bit about in-stream water rules. And I said, yes, we would really like you to come, and we'd like to ask questions, have you make your presentation, and make sure that we're getting the straight skinny and that you hear from us. So I'm really pleased and I'm honored that Rusty was willing to come out and talk to us, and I'll let him introduce himself and the people that came with him. He's going to make a presentation and then he's ready to answer questions. So I hope that everybody enjoys the night that we're sponsoring, and I'm really pleased you all came. Gloria?
Can I get the sign-in sheet? It's a yellow sheet.
They're still working on it.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Would you hand it back to me?
That'll put you on our email list. We'd really appreciate a $5 donation if you want to be on our email list and you don't want to join CAPR. We try to get newsletters out with information as often as we can. So just sign in and then we'll make sure you're on our email list. Well, Rusty, thank you for coming. I really seriously appreciate it.
Thanks, Cindy.
You coming out. So the rest is up to you. It's your show.
Okay, thanks. Well, hey, thank you, everybody, for showing up. I'm not here alone, obviously, but there's also a handful of folks in the audience who I've known and have met before, as well as I have a couple of Ecology colleagues with me. Keith Stoffel, who's our Water Resources Program manager, for lack of a better term, here in our Eastern Regional Office in Spokane.
Have a chair. You can sit up here.
He does have long legs.
And so Keith is here with me also to talk about some of the specifics of in-stream flow rules, water rights, some of those kind of things. I'm helping to coordinate the development of our in-stream flow rule. We also have Grant Pfeifer, who's our regional director here, and Brook Beeler, who's our public information person.
Grant, you want to come up and just so they can see you maybe?
And who's the other person?
Brook
This
Beeler.
is Grant, regional director. Thank you, Grant, for coming.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
But no E.
Because I have
Yeah, but no E on Brook.
Okay, you guys can come in. Those guys in the hall can come in if you want to stand.
As I said, my name is Rusty Post, and I'm with Ecology, and I'm in our Shorelands program. And I've been working on watershed planning and some flood management programs over the last couple of years. And I'm actually in watershed planning for about 10 years, all over north central Washington. And I'm going to let Keith start off and talk a little bit about some of the basics about the in-stream flow rule. I'm going to give a brief presentation. I also have a couple of extra slides, so if we need more diagrams or charts or those kind of things, I have a couple of extras that, if that'll be helpful to people. I don't want to talk for too long. I'd rather have a dialogue with you guys and try and answer your questions as best I can. So it's great to have some written questions, because those will help us as we go forward with the rulemaking and finishing up our draft rule. Right now we're still in the preliminary stages. But we look forward to just trying to answer your questions as best we can while we're standing up here. So that'll be kind of the first part. Then maybe we take a couple-minute break and then talk about the water bank feasibility study in the Little Spokane Basin. That sound good to you all? Okay, great. Keith?
Great. Well, number one, thanks for inviting the Department of Health here tonight to talk about some of the water management activities that we have started. We've been working on for many years in the Spokane Basin, for probably 12 or 14 now, since we started our Aquifer study back in 2002. So we kind of want to get you up to speed on what we've done, and you've read some things in the newspaper about this rule that we are going to be proposing. We wanted to get you the information on that, and then we'll have this conversation. I wanted everybody to, what I'd like to do is just sort of talk about these maps real quick that we passed out. No, it's okay. Just give you sort of the background of where it is we're working in. And this first pretty map here is a map of the Spokane Basin and the Little Spokane Basin. So you can see on the right side Fondre Lake and Hayden and Coeur d'Alene, and then this on the left side is the Little Spokane drainage. So we'll be talking about that a little later. We're going to start first with discussion about the proposed rule we have for the aquifer that is the Spokane Valley Aquifer, Ethel Perry Aquifer.
Sir, I can't hear you when you're kind of looking that way.
Okay. So, you all have this map just as a reference point to the places we'll be talking about. Now, just as a background for the Spokane Aquifer, I want you to just visualize how the aquifer system works in both Idaho and Washington. The aquifer starts up at the Pondre Lake and flows all the way down to the Coeur d'Alene Lake. Is the Spokane River starts at Coeur d'Alene Lake outlet, and so we have the Spokane River flowing through the Spokane Valley, and the Spokane Aquifer arm up here that comes out of Pondre Lake. So we have the water comes underground. It doesn't come surface water out of Pondre. It's groundwater through that part of the Idaho border, and then it's surface water and groundwater here. So Rusty's going to tell you more details about it, but I just wanted to sort of put out the perspective of the big picture, kind of where we are.
Does everybody know where we are on this map?
I'm assuming that if it's in blue, it's surface water. If it's in green, it's under.
Good go. Yeah. And then the state line is, kind of in the middle there.
And that's Mount Spokane there in the middle. Now, the next map you have here gives you some sense of a little bit more of the details on the geography of the valley itself. Again, it's the purple here is the Spokane Aquifer, and you see the red line going right down the middle of the map. That's the state line, Idaho-Washington border. And then the thing that we want you to see on this map, which we'll be talking about a little more later, is you can see where all the municipalities are mapped on there for you. And that's an important part of our discussion tonight about these municipalities and their municipal water purveyors, and they're the ones who serve water to all the folks on the footprint here of the aquifer. So, and then there's one other map, that's the Little Spokane Range. We'll talk about it later. We don't need to talk about it right now. I think what we want to just, before Rusty gets into the details, what we're proposing to do is to write an in-stream flow rule for the Spokane Aquifer Spokane River. And it's important to understand that this rule does not cover all the Spokane watershed. It only covers that area shown in purple on those maps. It's the footprint of the aquifer itself, and only in Washington. It does not pertain to Idaho. It's just the Washington side of the border. And the rule is for the river, but the river and the aquifer are in direct continuity with each other. This is one of the most prolific aquifers in the world. The water moves through it faster than just about any other aquifer in the world. And so the water in the river is sort of in constant communication with the aquifer water. So I think with that as background, what we'd like to do is have Rusty give a presentation without questions first, so we can get through without being too disjointed. And then we're going to leave most of the time for questions about the rule and what it is we're going to propose to do. And then in the second part, we'll talk about the Little Spokane, which is not the rule. It's not what we're talking about. So just make sure that's clear right now. The first part we're talking about is the rule that's under development is for the Spokane River Aquifer in Washington State, and it does not apply to Little Spokane. There's already a rule on the Little Spokane. We've had a rule in place there for 40 years now, and we'll talk about that more in the second half. So with that, we'll let Rusty take off and go into detail.
Great, thanks, Keith. This isn't really long, so we'll have plenty of time for questions, and I'll do the best I can with, let's see.
Run that and you can talk.
Well, yeah, but I think I need to do that. That. And then if I do, oops. I think if I do that. Can everybody see that? And did I get the focus all right on it? Okay. So here's just a nice little picture of the river. There's plenty of places along the river that, just have nice, clear, calm water, pools and riffles. Pretty straightforward. That's just a nice shot of the river. I liked it. So here's what the rule is about. It just covers the aquifer and the river itself. It does not apply to any historical uses or existing water rights. It only goes from this point forward in time for any proposed new water uses. and it will help keep water in the river so that the river doesn't keep getting lower and lower each year. One thing about in-stream flow rules is because it's based usually on a particular watershed or a water body, it's very unique to that place because every watershed is very different. It has different people, different activities that go on there, different characteristics of soil and ground and rock and elevation. All those things make every watershed very unique. So the rule that we're proposing in the Spokane isn't like any of the other rules in the state. There are some basic things that have to go into rules, but each rule is about how to manage water. So each one is different for how to manage water in that place for those people and for the conditions and characteristics that are there. So this is about 100 years worth of information starting back in 1890. Let me see if this works. Oh yeah, starts back in about 1890. And it just shows the 7-day low flow. So it's a rolling average where you average the low flow during a 7-day period. So it could be from Tuesday to next Monday or Sunday to the following Saturday. And each year there's, if you look at that rolling average, there's usually one period where those are the 7 lowest flow days of the year. So that's what a 7-day low flow is. It's just an average for that week. Excuse me. As you can see, the general trend for the river over the last 100 years has been going down. And that's of concern because we're getting down to some pretty low levels. This is 200 CFS, or cubic feet per second. Average used to be up, 1,500, 1,600. If you looked at it, if you average all of it, you'd probably be in the 1,500, 1,600 range. Now we're getting down to our low flows are in the 600 range. So that's concern to us. The Spokane gauge is the oldest continually operating gauge in the state. It has probably the best data set available for any water body, any river, anywhere in the state. Does everybody understand this graph? Anybody have any questions about it?
Is that the same 7-day period each year?
No, it's whatever the low flow is that year. Because every year, during the snow melt off, so sometimes it's a little earlier, sometimes it's a little later. This is just the lowest 7 days of the year.
And would you mention that amount for the lowest, or the one that's the most current in 2010?
So that one is about 900.
Do you have a chart that shows the rainfall of the snow, the water level that was rain, precipitation that came in relationship?
Yeah, there's a lot of that data, that they keep in snowpack and river flows and all of that. I didn't want to try and make this really, there's so much data out there. I had to kind of pick and choose how much I put in this, and I just wanted to kind of show the trend of what's going on over time with the river and the flows in the river.
Is that downstream of the dam, though?
This is at Spokane, downtown.
Okay, so it's downstream of the dam.
Which one?
The dam could be shut off to fill the lake up and the river goes down and flow.
Post Falls.
Oh, you're talking about Post Falls?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, this is downtown Spokane. Post Falls is, I don't know. I'm not sure I understand your question.
Goes through Post Falls.
Correct. Right.
The dam downtown, too, so is it?
There's 7 dams on the Spokane River.
But wouldn't your chart be skewed if they closed the dam off and slow the water flow in the river?
Oh, like if they stop all flow coming out, it would be skewed, but a lot of the flow is groundwater that's coming from both Lake Coeur d'Alene and Pend d'Oreille Lake. So this is just a picture of of one of the lowest flow periods. This is what it looks like what the river looks like. This is at I don't know if you can read that, but this is looking upstream from Sullivan Road. This is 2009. And it looked like it was, and the discharge, so the flow that's coming out of Post Falls on that date was 320 cubic feet per second. And as you can see, this is probably quite a bit less than that.
Isn't your discharge from both Coeur d'Alene and Pend d'Oreille, that's what affects that aquifer level, which also affects the flow of the river?
Good question.
But also, Coeur d'Alene Lake used to be, about 1,900 feet. Now they've got it about 2,300 feet. They raised the level of it, so that's when it's considered flow. Also, there are the years you're showing there, we had some pretty extreme dry weather. the level of the aquifer was down about 15 or 20 feet from what you're seeing even today's levels. It's the highest I've ever seen it if you look at the premix pit. That's the highest I've seen it in a year. So that's a direct effect on that, rather than human intervention.
Well, it's a combination of the discharge from the dam and the groundwater, and
which is directly affected by how much moisture you
and a function of precipitation, exactly. So these are some of the hydro projects, and these are the two main fish species that we used in calculating what are minimum in-stream flows that the fish need. There are lots of other needs as well, but these are two of them. Oh, this one. Okay, here's some other uses.
Those two fish are what species? Rainbow trout?
Excuse me, yeah, rainbow or red band trout and mountain whitefish. So this is a really important graphic in the sense that it shows all the water service areas, all the water purveyors, and the aquifer itself. So this is state line here. So this is the aquifer, and the colored, I don't know, kind of a tannish, brownish color, whatever that is, those are all the water service areas, so water service providers. So it's the cities and Vera Water District, Liberty Lake, you know, all those guys. There's only a couple of small areas over the entire aquifer that there isn't water purveyor service coverage. And you can see there's a little spot up there, which is actually in Stevens County. There's a spot right there and a spot right there. During the last 10 years, we've been averaging, a handful of new wells drilled anywhere in this entire aquifer boundary. There's only been about a handful of wells drilled every year. So this is basically the same picture, but it's showing the water resource inventory areas, or watersheds. So 57 here is the entire, what we call the middle Spokane watershed. The area of the rule is outlined in black. So as you can see, it doesn't cover the entire watershed. This is the Hangman watershed, Wyra 56 here. Wyra 54 is lower Spokane, so this is West Plains, Airway Heights out here. Wyra 55 is the Little Spokane. And as you can see, part of the aquifer actually goes up into the Little Spokane drainage, all of this up here. So the aquifer actually splits as it's flowing down here. It splits. Some of it goes, I don't know if you can see, but behind the color here that's the actual river itself. And then as you go north up here, so this is the Y up on Division. So some of the water comes up and comes around, and then they come back together again into the river. And it adds the Little Spokane drainage into that. What we're proposing in the rule is only the area that you see outlined in black, and only the area on our side of the state line in Washington, because the Washington law doesn't apply to someone in Idaho. Actually, this would be a rule, not a law. Let's see. Up here it talks about the amount of the SVRP, Spokane Valley Rathdrum Prairie Aquifer. What these show is the amount of the aquifer that's in each of those other watersheds in terms of total land area. So the amount of the Spokane Valley Rathdrum Prairie that's in Wyra 55, or the Little Spokane watershed, is 3.5%. In the Lower Spokane, it's 2.6%. And in Wyra 57, it's 25% of the watershed. So even in the middle, this is called the Middle Spokane because the Upper Spokane is this part going up in Idaho, but that's Upper Spokane. So we start Middle Spokane and Lower Spokane. So it's about 25% of the entire watershed is actually has the aquifer in it, and that's the part of the rule area. The rule area won't apply outside of the black boundary line there.
Excuse me, I'm pretty confused. I spoke with Chris Anderson, I think he's your supervisor or head of your arena of your group.
Chris
And
Anderson's
he
our
told,
web.
I asked him specifically, I said, you're saying this is only that area that's outlined in black is going to be affected. I asked him specifically, does this only impact or include the water within the stream banks? Or does it include all the feeder springs like up on the mountainside where I am and all these feeder creeks and things that eventually come in and feed into the aquifer? And I said, are those going to be part of this regulation? And his answer to me was, it could be. And you're saying it's not. So I'm trying to get some clarification on it. Obviously, the springs up on Michael Peak where I live do impact the aquifer. So if you're saying just the aquifer and its resources are going to be impacted, you know, and Chris Anderson said to me, it could be, and you're saying it's not. So what's the discrepancy?
I'm not exactly sure when you talked to him or what the status of the development of the actual rule was itself. But as we've been working on the rule, what we realized is that the best way to manage the water for the Spokane River is to manage, because so much of it is just the interaction between the river and the aquifer itself and the aquifer boundaries, and because we have so much information and so much data, it would be worthwhile to pursue that and not try and get into every little tributary and all that kind of stuff all over the place, because we don't have quite as much information about all of that.
The short answer is no, the rule does not apply to the springs up above outside the valley. It only applies to the valley floor where there are these gravel deposits. I think you all probably know Spokane Valley is filled with hundreds of feet of gravel deposits from the flood, and then it's filled with water. And that's all we're proposing here is the river and the aquifer. It does not include anything up off the valley floor.
What are you looking to towards the future? That was the question. And that's what concerns some of us in this room.
But we have no plan.
Suddenly you got the Spokane River you're controlling, however you want to control it. But how far are your fingers going to reach out there on the rest of it?
Right now,
this would affect literally everybody in this room.
Right now, there's no plan for any rule up outside the basin, outside the valley floor. Rusty, I think maybe it might be good to step back a minute and sort of talk about why we're here and why we're proposing a rule to start with. So back in about 2000 or so, we started a project to understand the Spokane aquifer, and it was sort of initiative driven by a lot of the water purveyors and some of the environmental groups, the Chamber of Commerce, really anybody who was anybody as a player in water in the Spokane Coeur d'Alene area was interested in us getting a study done, a thorough study of the aquifer, so that we could eventually get to this point, you know, with some good hard data behind it. So we started this study, I believe, in 2002. It was a joint study done by the United States Geological Survey in cooperation with the Department of Water Resources in Idaho and the Department of Ecology in Washington. It was also overseen by all these folks that I talked about. We had many public meetings throughout the whole process. It took 5 or 6, 7 years to actually finish the study and get the results out. And so we have a very good understanding of how the aquifer and the river work together. Like I said earlier, they interact with each other. We've been working cooperatively with Idaho. We still work with Idaho. We meet with them a couple times a year to talk about these particular issues. The reason we're sort of launching this proposal to put a rule in place is that, as you can see, this is a shared aquifer. It's shared by the people of the state of Idaho, and it's shared by the people of the state of Washington. And if you follow water issues anywhere else in the world, you probably know anytime there's a border, there's an argument over who owns the water. And it pretty much happens everywhere, and some of these debates go on for 30, 40 years, some of the Colorado Plateau and Colorado River. And you end up, most times, you end up in a place where you have some sort of intervention by the federal government, some sort of adjudication of all the water rights in both states. And so when we first started to get together and talk with Idaho, we both started off on the same path, and that we felt like there's a couple, 3 things you need to do. One is you need to sort of get some sort of a voice for the river in both sides of on each side of the border. So Idaho already has an in-stream flow rule for the Spokane River on the Idaho side. We also started down doing an adjudication. Adjudication is where a court comes in, and in this case, the state court comes in and takes a look at every single water right in these, whatever area you're looking at, and then determines what, number one, what water rights are valid, and then number two, what's the quantities that those are valid for. Idaho started down the path. They got funding to do it, and they're getting close to finishing their adjudication of all water rights in northern Idaho. We started down that path as well, and we did a lot of pre-work to do an adjudication here in the state of Washington, but recession came along and it knocked us down, and we never really got funding. We never got it off the ground. And we still don't have it off the ground. We have not looked at the value of the water rights in the state of Washington, and right now we're at least 2 years out before we even start one. Idaho is closing in on finishing theirs in the next couple of years. So the bottom line, the reason we're here and the reason we're proposing this rule is we think the Spokane River and Aquifer in Washington State needs a voice. And the way you get that voice for the river is you pass an in-stream flow rule, which the rules is essentially a water right for the river. And it's a water right like any other water right. And it has a priority date of the date the rule will eventually be passed. And so all the water rights that are out there today on the Washington side will be senior to the in-stream flow rule when we're done. And the rule will not apply to them. There's some nuances around it where there's some potential things. If you change a water right, you're going to have to look at the water right when you change it. But for the most part, the rule will be junior to all the senior water rights that are out there. All the rights held by the municipalities, by Avista, all the players, their rights will not be subject to this rule.
What about individuals with their own well in their yard?
Now, if the well's there already, doesn't apply.
I subdivide my land in 4 or 5 years, and I want to put in some wells on each lot.
We'll talk about that in a minute. It's a great question, and we'll come back to that. So that's why we're here. We're trying to get a voice for the river in the event that there is an interstate conflict over water between Washington and Idaho. They have all their sort of ducks in a row. We have really nothing in hand at this point in time. We're not in disagreement with Idaho. I want you to understand that. There's not a war going on here. We're working very cooperatively with them. They actually are encouraging us to move forward and get our adjudication done eventually, get our in-stream flow rule in place eventually, and so that we're both working on the same level and playing field if and when if the time comes when there's some sort of adjudication of the water rights on both sides of the line. And so that's why we're here. That's why we're proposing what we're proposing to do.
I'm not sure, but it sounds a little bit like maybe the cart before the horse. If you don't adjudicate first, and then you come up with the in-stream rather than the in-stream first, which is what Idaho's done. I'm not sure. Can you explain that, why it seems a little backwards?
Well, right now we still have water rights. The water rights, we will, even though they're not adjudicated, we still manage the water rights on the Washington side of the border according to Washington law and rules. And we can do that without an adjudication. Adjudication just tightens things up and makes it clear. It eliminates sort of the question of whether water rights or any particular water right is valid or not. And it also gives an extent. So it's much better to have adjudication in place, but we can still move forward and implement our laws and our rules without one in place.
One more question.
I was going to add on to that, which is an adjudication looks at all of the existing water rights. It doesn't project out in the future like who might do what. It just looks at the water rights that are there. Since we can do the in-stream flow rule, and it might take us about a year to do it, doing the adjudication could take 5 or 10 years. And what it will do is it will look at all of the historical water uses and all the existing water rights. So they're very different. I mean, the in-stream flow rule would be a water right, but it would still be junior to all the other ones.
I guess I'm still trying to understand a little bit, is that by doing it this way, I can see where the courts would take into effect sometimes what has been in place or practiced and make that more important perhaps than the historical, because we've been doing it a certain way because it wasn't done with adjudication first, So then you get a few years worth of precedence, and then they start going with that rather than something else. Is that not possible?
Well, that's what a court looks at in adjudication. How were the rights exercised in the past? What's been the historic?
I guess I'm just really
benefits?
concerned about some of our judges today. I'm not really confident.
Well, we're not going to have we're not going to have an adjudication in place for a while, so we don't need to worry for a few years anyway. But, so let me go back to this gentleman's question back here. It's really important here because the meeting started with a discussion about the Skagit and the 450 wells that are homes that are not going to have a water right there. It's a long story, and I won't go into the details, but the state Supreme Court did make a decision that said that a rule that Ecology passed in that basin, and actually a whole series of sub-basins there, was not valid. That Ecology did not have the authority to make the decisions they made in that rule, which essentially in that rule we established reserves, and we said, well, there's this much water available for future growth in this sub-basin, and this sub-basin, and this sub-basin, and so on. And so these homes were built with that rule in place. But then the Supreme Court, that rule was challenged by the tribe over there, and it then went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that Ecology had in fact overstepped their bounds and their authority, and ruled that the rule was invalid for the Skagit Basin. And so there are 450 homes there that currently don't have water rights, but the tribe is working with Ecology, and Ecology is working with the legislature to get funding to cover those 450 homes. That process is underway right now. Now, let me tell you about the back, and that's really important here, is the backlash to that then became there was a group of legislators just this spring who went to the governor's office and said, this in-stream flow rulemaking stuff is a mess. It's around permit-exempt wells, like the gentleman in the back mentioned. That's the biggest, hardest, toughest water issue to deal with in the state, and in all the western states, not just Washington State. How do you deal with exempt wells, particularly in rural settings? So this group of legislators went to the governor's office and said, look, we've got to stop this rulemaking stuff because it's a nightmare. We need to get the legislature to make some decisions about permit-exempt wells, which is what the Supreme Court said. It said the Ecology overstepped their bounds. This is really a legislative decision. The legislators need to fix this problem. So they went to the governor's office, and the Department of Ecology went and argued for the ability to move forward in Spokane only. And I want you to understand that this is the only in-stream flow rule currently authorized to be worked on in the state of Washington. And the reason is we don't have permit-exempt well problem here. Like Rusty showed, you have that?
Show that one again.
Show that.
Take your thing off.
The important thing to understand here, on the footprint of the aquifer, the water, there is a water purveyor. There are 20 water purveyors in the state of Washington. On the Washington side, there's a Spokane Aquifer Joint Board. There's 20 water purveyors, and they serve water to virtually everybody on the footprint of the aquifer. So if you have property on the aquifer, you get water from a purveyor. The gentleman back talked about the springs, somewhere up here. It does not apply in this case. So it's only the properties on this footprint here out in the valley, with the exception of a few parcels way up to the northwest and a few over in here. And they're a handful. And we think they're probably somewhere in the order of a couple dozen parcels that someone could drill a permit-exempt well on at this time. The purveyors actually could serve them, and the purveyors may want to serve them when they go to build that onto those properties. But even if they don't, we think we have a solution where we don't get reserves. We're going to just we're looking at several solutions where we think we can obtain enough water rights to just cover future use of that handful of permit-exempt wells that are going to go in the future. And then everybody else is served by the purveyors. The governor's office agreed with us and gave us the green light to go move forward on this rule because we're not going to end up in that same mess around permit-exempt wells here like has occurred everywhere else around the state. So that's why we're here today. That's why we're proposing a rule today, anyway, is to protect the people of Washington's interest in the Spokane River and the Spokane Aquifer and the water in it, and just put ourselves in a position of strength if and when the time comes that we end up in some sort of interstate dispute with Idaho over who owns how much water in the aquifer system.
One question. You mentioned Idaho, but nothing said about Montana and the water rights. Washington Water Power Vista has water rights over their existing currently on extreme flow. Would you address that a bit?
Well, this water is not connected to Montana anyway. The Clark Fork flows into the Pend Oreille, and the Pend Oreille flows into the Clark Fork into Pend Oreille Lake, and Pend Oreille Lake exits in the Pend Oreille and goes up to the north on the Pend Oreille River. That's not an issue for us right now. Pend Oreille River is the only in our eastern region where we are actually issuing new water rights because there still is water available in the Pend Oreille River.
Yeah, this guy here.
That the Pend Oreille is the start of our watershed, the lower end of the Pend Oreille, which is completely away from the Pend Oreille River. So
yeah, it comes out. It drains out the south end, and there's no surface water flow. Just to make it clear, there's no surface water drainage out of Pend Oreille Lake. It's groundwater leaks out of the lake basin into the Rathrum Prairie Aquifer in Idaho, flows down the Rathrum Prairie as groundwater, not as surface water, and then emerges into the Spokane River. So there is no surface drainage from Pend Oreille Lake to the Spokane River.
You have a question over here? Or we do?
You've been mentioning passing this rule. By what method are you going to pass it, and who gets to vote on it?
Good question. We're just now starting. We don't have the rule to give to you tonight. We're very close. We're hoping to get the rule out into the hands of everybody in this room. We want you to sign up or let us know if you're interested in getting. You'll see it. We're going to distribute it widely when it comes out. But we're just at the very beginning. We have a proposed rule that we have drafted, but it's when we put it out, it's going to be out for public review, first of all, and then we will have public meetings, public hearings. Everyone will get their voice. There's lots of players who are interested in this rule. The power folks, all the municipalities, really any of the water users.
What if it doesn't be passed?
Well, so there's a process. The process is a public process, and it will take a year for us to run through that process. The first draft we're going to put out is just a preliminary draft, and we'll accept comments back. And then we go into a second phase, which is where we actually publish it in the register. It goes out, and then there'll be public hearing. And so there's no guarantee that this rule will pass at this point in time. We're just now starting the process. We're accepting all the public comments in the public hearing, and then we'll, depending on what we hear, we'll adjust the rule accordingly and then determine whether to move forward or not.
So what the Power Department of Ecology has in this state, is there a chance of overriding the vote?
Well, Ecology ultimately decides whether to implement the rule or not.
So it won't even count?
Sure. Well, we listen to, it's all a transparent public process. We'll listen to all the comments. I can tell you the example. We started a rule for, many of you may have heard of the Quincy Subbasin, out where the Columbia Basin Project is. And we started a rule there about 5-6 years ago, where we had a petition from somebody that said, hey, we want you to amend the existing rule. In that case, it was already a rule. We wanted you to amend it. We went out, we had 4 or 5 public meetings, and we heard 50-50 split. 50% of people wanted the amendment as proposed. 50% said, no, that's not a good idea. We just pulled the plug on it, and the rule still today sits as it is. So we listen to public comment, and then we'll make a decision based on all those comments.
So just to be clear, the public will never vote on this.
No, the public does not vote, but you have your voice through the public hearing process.
So it'll be an unlegislated law.
It's a rule. It's not a law.
It's a Department of Ecology rule, not a legislative rule, correct?
It's a whack, yes.
Yeah, it'll be a whack, yeah.
It's a whack.
So even the legislature will vote.
No, but I will guarantee you they will have their voice. We have already, just so you know, we've already gone out. We've had meetings with Wes McCart's been in some of the meetings. We've gone to each of the legislators in the Spokane legislative district. We've met with them all personally weeks or months ago now. We talked to them, we explained to them what we were proposing to do. We got their feedback. In fact, one of I think was Representative Foley who had suggested that we contact your group and talk to your folks. We're going to talk to anybody who wants to talk about it. It's going to be a public, transparent process. So we will hear from the legislators, but at the end of the day, it is the Department of Ecology's decision whether to implement the rule or not.
What is the essence of the rule, just to review for everyone? Can you just give us a bare bones?
Yeah, it's very simple. In fact, I think what we need to do, can we pass this Little Spokane rule out? So just to alleviate folks' fears a little bit, we're going to pass out the rule for the Little Spokane, which was passed in 1976, 40 years old now almost. And it did pretty much the same thing that we're proposing to do here. And that is, it established, first of all, some control points, some measuring points and gauging stations. And in the case of the Little Spokane, that gauging station that we measure off of is Dartford, on the Little Spokane at Dartford. And in the case of the Spokane, we're going to have two measuring points, one out in the valley at Barker Road and downtown gauge. Those will be the two measuring points where we measure the flow. And then, as you'll see in this rule that we're passing out here, we then establish the numbers, how much flow is required to be at those gauges, and it changes through the course of the water year. There's a number for the winter time, there's a number for the springtime, there's a number for the summertime. Except downtown, there's only one number for the Barker Road gauge. That's really it. That's what the rule is that's enough. It's the number that we will make decisions on applications for future water. Again, these numbers that you're going to see, let me give you an example. Let me tell you how the Little Spokane rule has worked for the last 40 years, and it's been very smooth, and we've had no real controversy. Okay, in 1976, this rule passed, and I think the important thing you see, do you have one of those? So
I just gave the last one away.
So just borrow it. Okay, on page number 2, in the column at the bottom, in the little chart, on the second column from the right, there's a number, it's at the top, it says Dartford. That's the Dartford gauge. And these are the numbers, the flow numbers that need to be met at those gauges in the different times of the year. So you can see on the left, it's January through December. And if you look down Dartford, the lowest number on there is 115. Okay, and 115 applies to July through mid-September. Okay? So, what happens in the Little Spokane, we issued this rule in 1976, when the flow, and the rule did not apply to any water right that was in place prior to 1976. Any water right prior to that was a senior water right, the rule does not apply to it. Okay. When the flow of the river hits 115, we can regulate against any water rights issued after the rule went into effect, after 1976. Okay? We, in fact, did issue about 150 water rights on the Little Spokane after 1976. So those are all junior to the flow, or junior to that 115 flow. And so every one of those water rights has a provision that says when the flow drops below the number in this rule, we can regulate and shut those water users off. Okay, 6 or 7 years out of every 10 since then, it has dropped below 115. And what we do is we notify those people who have those water rights with those provisions, and we say, hey, we've dropped below that number, you need to shut off now. Now, the beauty in the Little Spokane is that what happens is just about every one of those water users is also on Whitworth Water District water. So they use the water out of the Little Spokane until we say, hey, we've dropped below the number, you got to shut off. They quit diverting out of the river. They use their Whitworth water to irrigate with during the period of time that we're down below the flow 115. And that's exactly how we envision this Spokane rule to work. The number's going to be different because the river's bigger. So we'll have a larger number downtown in the dry time of year. We'll have a flow number out at Barker and a flow number downtown in the summer. That's really the time that we would expect that there might be some regulation. Now, our goal is to not have any junior water rights to regulate. We'd just as soon be out of the business and not telling anybody they got to shut up. And the way we do that is we don't issue any new water rights. Once the rule goes into place, we don't issue any new water rights that are junior to the rule that then have to be subject to being shut off. So right now we only have 22 applications on file for new water, and our intention is that after the rule passes, that we will probably deny each of those applications and say water is not available in the Spokane. Now that's not earth-shattering, because we haven't issued a new water right in Spokane since the late 80s, early 90s. It's been a long time. So for all intents and purposes, we're just sort of formalizing the practice that we've had for a long time.
What is a water right? Is that like permission to dig a well, or what?
Yeah, it's a permission to use water of the state. Anytime you use more than, and maybe we should backtrack, we're kind of assuming here that everybody knows what permanent exempt means. If you have water use, if you drill your own well, your own domestic well, your own house, you can use up to 5,000 gallons a day of water in-house, and you can irrigate a half an acre lawn garden. You can also have private, commercial, industrial use for 5,000 gallons a day, and also some stock water use, unlimited, whatever your cows need to drink. You can do that without having, the reason we call it permanent exempt is because you don't have to come to us and submit an application to get a water right, get a permit. You kind of skip that whole permitting process, and but you still have a water right. The day you put that permit, your well in, and you start pumping that water, that's the day that your water right goes into effect. And that's the question the gentleman asked back in the back about does this apply to the permanent exempts? No. Those permanent exempt wells that were in place and being used prior to the rule being passed are senior to the rule, and the rule will not apply to them. It would only be wells, permanent exempt wells, these domestic use wells, they're going to be put into, drilled after the rule passes. And again, that's what we talked about in this map. There are just so darn few of parcels on the footprint of the aquifer that we don't think it's going to be an issue, and we can cover the future withdrawals from those very small number of domestic wells in the future. This gentleman's been having his hand up for a while.
For the better part of 4 decades, I've been involved in selling products to agricultural distributors over a wide area that were involved in water distribution products. One of the things I've noticed, you mentioned multiple states, Montana, Idaho, Oregon, and not mentioned is California. What I've seen in one significant area of that, following studies done, is that, I'll give you an example. In the coastal area where they've got a lot of grapes, the central coast of California, some college professors have had a particular agenda, did some research and found that the river going through Santa Maria used to spawn salmon. Now the water was being pulled by wells and the grape industry. So that all of a sudden there's they're coming after us for this. Well, you get a few attorneys with another special interest groups, and next thing you know, they're starting to lay the groundwork to force the farmers to give up the water, to put more water into the Santa Maria River so that the salmon can spawn. So there's a lot of politics in the Central Valley of what used to be the greatest agriculture production area in the world. You had a problem with little fish coming through the water. And again, special agenda people, lawyers, federal courts, Supreme Courts. Now you have signs as you go up and down the I-5 that refer to this as this dust bowl as a result of the federal government. The Santa Paula area where they have orange orchards and lemon orchards and that, it's all moving to South America. How much of the studies that you do, I mean, we mentioned what's kind of locally done, you refer to the state, but how much of it really comes from studies mandated by the federal government, and how much of the agriculture of Washington will be forced to go to South America?
Two great questions. Number one, the federal government had nothing to do with the study of the Spokane aquifer. It was done the U.S. Geological Survey conducted the study, but it was done through the Idaho Department of Water Resources and the Washington Department of Ecology. The federal government doesn't manage water in at least in Spokane Aquifer. This is all state laws and state rules that how we manage water here. But the good point about the agriculture is that, you all know that back in the day, back at the turn of the century, that Spokane Valley was, in fact, a very agricultural area. There were a lot of orchards and a lot of crops being grown. But the trend is exactly the other way today, that there are many, many agricultural irrigation rights that are being bought up by municipalities or water purveyors for municipal uses, for domestic uses, developments, industrial uses, whatever municipalities need water for. That's the trend. There should not, number one, anybody who's got a water right for agriculture, it's in place, what agricultural is left. But we're going the other way. We're going away from agriculture here in the Spokane Coeur d'Alene corridor, and we're going to municipal uses. Now, one other thing we didn't mention, can you put that other map up one more time? One other thing we didn't mention is that I think we told you there were 18 water purveyors that cover the Washington side of the border. They all have water rights. They have portfolios of water rights. And when they run out of water, they try to find, there aren't too many there in the case where they've run out of water yet, but they can find agricultural irrigation rights to buy and transfer over to municipal uses. We've seen some of that in the last few years. But the other thing is, these folks who have this portfolio of water rights, as of today, the amount of water that we use on the Washington side of the border, in the Spokane Aquifer is about 140,000 acre feet a year. Okay? Those 18 purveyors hold another 140,000 acre feet of water rights. They're on paper that they will be growing into. There is no shortage of water in this basin for future growth. There's more water that can be put into play here than just about anywhere in the state of Washington. So if you're concerned with your property right that you won't get water on any land that you own on the footprint of here, don't worry about it, because the purveyors have got so much water to put into play in the future that there shouldn't be any reason why any parcel of property on that ground, agriculture or otherwise, would not have water available for use on it. This gentleman back here.
Doesn't it contradict the one chart of the 7-day rolling average of the low flows, which you just said, to what he showed?
No, it doesn't contradict it. That I think what Rusty showed was the fact that as we've used more and more water collectively in the Spokane Coeur d'Alene area, and the gentleman who mentioned the outflow of the lake is definitely right. The lake is being managed differently than it used to be managed. We've got this downward trend, and we think it will continue. Even if we pass the rule, passing the rule doesn't stop the use of the water that the senior water rights holders hold. Their paper water, the water they have not used yet. They're entitled to grow into that water. And we anticipate that when they use that water, as water use continues to increase, as we get growth, that the flow would actually continue to drop, continue to decline. Now, and that's one of the reasons that the rule won't affect that. We can't stop the bleeding by passing this rule. We're not going to make the river better. It's probably going to get worse. Now, one of the things that's helped us out here, and one of the reasons that you'll see when the rule comes out, Avista just went through a relicensing process under FERC, the Federal Energy Regulation Commission and stuff, where there's 7 dams, or they have 5, I believe, on the system.
5. Yeah, I think I said 7.
Anyway, they went through the process, and they established, in their FERC relicensing, they established flows at Barker Road. And it's actually making the river better, because the minimum flow, Rusty showed you a picture at Sullivan Lake, the Sullivan Bridge, but at the right up at the Barker Road gauge, the flow had dropped to less than 200. I think that's the lowest we've ever seen. Now, in the FERC, and that's because of the way the water was operated coming out of the dam, in part. And now, under the FERC relicensing process, they're required to have the flow at Barker be 500 minimum. So we've actually are getting better flows now than we've had in the past. That means that the lake is being dropped a little more in order to get that flow up during those dry times. So that's been in effect for 3 years.
Yeah.
And I think we've had the low flow in the summer has not been allowed to drop below 500 in that part of the river. Did you bring that picture showing the rate gaining and losing?
Yeah. Can we get down?
Yeah, we need to show you a little bit about geology lesson here to make you understand how this river and aquifer system work. While he's getting that,
Yeah, can I just back up and ask you a quick question? Because I came in on sleep, but my question to you is a little different than all the other questions. Say I'm just off of that bubble of the aquifer. I'm just up on the hill. I can see where there's consolidated water right below me, but I can't get it. My well's 460 feet deep. Okay, I'm not in the aquifer. I'm in a fissure. Is there anything, and I've got a 3,000 gallon holding tank. My concern as a private citizen here is somebody going to put a meter on that well and charge me for the water? That's one of the rumors I've heard. So we talk about rule, but there's been no definition of it. So.
Rumor, not true. Not on any existing permit, any existing well, permit exempt well, we're not requiring meters. No, that's a bad rumor. It's not true.
That's not
This one you want to...
state tells you when you go
because that is going around.
Well, I'm the guy here who you got to come talk to and sit across the desk, so come talk to me, because we cannot require you to put a well on your existing permit. Well, we can, but we're not going to do it. So, let me go to this a minute, just so you understand. I know it's kind of...
You can require it, but you're not going to do it.
No, we don't do
Well,
it.
it's already in state law that ecology, that the legislature passed. It is in the law that ecology can require someone to put a meter on their well. But generally speaking, all over the state, we don't want that headache.
No.
And no one else does either.
We wouldn't know what to do with the water, what the data would do. I mean, can you imagine trying to manage the data from
4 million.
Millions, hundreds of thousands of wells in the state of Washington? It can't be done. We just can't do it. Sorry.
I'm from Idaho, and I understand the concern about the meter. But when we have an existing property that goes back to 1936, so we have a very senior water right. But and you talked about growing into the use. On our water rights, we have to prove beneficial use. We have 5 horses. I did the application for 5 horses. And I said we might want to have 7 horses. Can I put it down for 7? And the answer is no. That they actually reserve the right to go to your property and inspect your property, count the horses, count the cattle, and if you don't have them, you're in violation of your water rights and they can jerk it from you. They also have a limit on the domestic water you can use. So if you've got a 3,000 gallon tank, I can't remember how many gallons you're allowed per day for domestic use. You can water a half of an acre and estimate it. But there are caps in Idaho that the domestic people can use for their personal use. So to think that you can pull 3,000 gallons a day indefinitely, if it's applied like it is in Idaho, won't work. Because your permit sets how much you can use for domestic, how much you can use for...
And how could they monitor that without a monitoring device?
Well, in Idaho, they can come to your property and count your horses.
But they don't have horses. I mean, we have very low flow.
Yeah.
Our well test, is 4 to 5 gallons a minute. So to turn on the sprinkler pump...
Let me just speak to that, because you're absolutely right. In Idaho, and there's a couple nuances there. Number one, Idaho, I think, is about 13,000 gallons a day. Number one, nobody uses 5,000 gallons a day in-house. I mean, unless you got 14 teenagers, you don't use, you use probably about 8 to 100 to 1,000 in-house for your domestic uses. So the 5,000 gallon limit is not going to touch anybody. The half an acre lawn and garden, you're supposed to stick with that, and we know a lot of people don't, but they should. This gentleman's talking about, I think, a water right. In the state of Washington, the way we manage this permit exempts, there's an actual exemption in the state water code back from 1945, and that's where these limits, these quantity limits are in place. The 5,000 gallons a day in-house, commercial, industrial, half an acre, lawn and garden, and unlimited stock water. That stock water question was addressed by the state Supreme Court a few years ago, and so any stock you have on your property, there's no limit to it. About the water. Now, one other thing that is a great question here, because we've been talking so far about the people here who own all these water rights. They're municipal water purveyors. They serve water for municipal supply purposes. And this gentleman's talking about, you have a water right, and you got to live within the limits of your water right. And that's true in Washington State too, for everybody, and it's based on what you actually use, not what piece of paper you hold. Well, that's true for everybody in the state of Washington too, until 2003, when the legislature passed the municipal water law. And what the municipal water law did was, for the municipal providers, if you qualify as a municipal provider, that water that you haven't used yet, that piece of water right that's unused, is good. It's good to grow into. It was the growing communities doctrine, that the legislature recognized that municipalities are going to need water to grow into in the future, and so we're going to make that paper that they have pretty untouchable. There are ways still that can be touched, but as long as communities are growing into these water rights, that water is going to be available for future growth. So it is different. It's a different playing field between an individual or an ag right or industrial right or anybody except a municipal water provider, and they do have a sort of special status that allows them to grow into that paper water. One thing I wanted to point out here about how the aquifer works, and I know it's small and can't see it real well, but this map goes from Coeur d'Alene Lake.
Want the pointer? It's the red one on top.
So Coeur d'Alene Lake is right here. Here's Hayden Lake up here, and Pondera's up off the map. And so the beige color here is the aquifer footprint, like you've seen before. There's Coeur d'Alene Lake. Here's downtown Spokane way over here. And this is the arm that goes up into Long Lake, Lake Spokane. And Little Spokane's up here on this map. Now, what I want you to understand here is we've been talking about this gauge at Barker Road, which is like right here, just west of so here's the state line, and just west of the state line is where that gauge is. And that's where we see the river get at its lowest point in here, traditionally. Now what happens is the river, the water comes out of the lake, goes onto the ground, flows down the river, and in that stretch from Coeur d'Alene Lake to over about where Kaiser Trentwood is here in the valley, the river, hopefully you can see this little diagram down here, the river flows along and it loses water out its bay, out of the bottom. And it feeds the aquifer, so we call that a gaining stretch, where the aquifer, a losing stretch, where the river is losing water to the ground. And so that 700, in this day that they measured this, 738 CFS was leaving the lake. And by the time it got down here to Barker Road, it was 130 something. So it lost 600 CFS of water out of the bottom of the river in that short distance from Coeur d'Alene Lake to about where Kaiser Trentwood is. Now, if you go to Kaiser Trentwood and you go out and poke around the river out there, you'll see there are a massive set of springs that start coming out of the ground, out of the river, there in the Kaiser Trentwood area. And so between Kaiser Trentwood and downtown Spokane, the river gains 600 feet. It gains it all right back. So it comes out of the lake, flows down the river, loses into the ground, but then the ground gives it right back. So by the time you get downtown, you're back to the same number again. And then from downtown all the way up here, the river gains another 324 CFS because it's picking up more springs as it goes along. So that this is a very unique aquifer. Water flows quickly through it. The river and the aquifer are very connected. And water comes in, goes out, and that's why this. So I think I cut it. That's why this flow number. So the flow number we've been talking about is the one gauge is at the Barker Road, right just west of the state line, and that's the lowest point. So when the river, the number that we set, let's say the number set, I think in FERC it's set at 500 CFS. That means that they're going to have to release somewhere around 1,000 to 1,200 CFS of water out of the lake at Post Falls Dam in order for 500 to get to Barker Road. Okay, does everybody understand that? Because that's really critical to this whole discussion.
Just a little correction on that, though. My understanding is that 500 at Barker was a target, but their release is actually moving to Post Falls. And that would be a 500 to a 600.
Yeah, it's Grant, you might want to talk about that. He was in the process. But we don't expect that. We expect that flow could there. Now, if we Yeah, and so that's the Idaho side too, and our law does not, if we pass this rule, our rule will not apply in Idaho. Okay. That's a good point.
When Steve Neugebauer came over to speak to us, he's a hydrogeologist on the other side of the mountains. He surmised that your studies of aquifers have not gone deep enough into the earth, and that there are multiple aquifers deeper underneath the Rathdrum aquifer. And I'd like to ask you if you're satisfied that you really have gone deep enough. In some states, they're being forced to go deeper, and they're finding multiple aquifers. So by, I understand your philosophy of wanting to limit flow and to control flow on the surface, basically. But what if there are other aquifers underneath that can be tapped for water that would allow more growth in our area? Are you really looking deep enough and wide enough at the available water?
You don't really need to look deeper. The aquifer is saturated for many hundreds of feet. Rob Lindsay from the county back here, how thick is the aquifer, saturated aquifer thickness out in the valley?
Oh gosh.
Varies.
400 feet.
400 or 500 feet. So you've got a bucket sitting there with 400 or 500 feet of water sitting there. So there's no reason to go any deeper. None of the wells that are drilled go much deeper than the top of the aquifer because it's just a costly expense. But there's an enormous amount of water in the aquifer system underneath the valley.
But if somebody wanted to, they could certainly go and put in a well and see if they could get deeper water. There's no prohibition against doing that.
Sure.
It's just expensive.
Except costs.
Yeah.
Over the years, that 5,000 gallon a day unexempt wells has been discussed and discussed and discussed. And obviously not to increase it, but to decrease it. Is there any chance that in your new rule, this might seep in, find its way into the regulation?
Did everybody hear the question?
No.
Okay, he was asking if there's any way that in our rule here that we're proposing that the 5,000 gallon limit a day for permit exempts would go down. The answer is no. That limit is in statute, not in rules, so statute trumps the rule. So the 5,000 gallon day limit is in our 9044-100 state groundwater statute passed in 1945.
Now, on a rule, correct me if I'm wrong, on a rule, the legislature has 2 years in which to, if they don't like it, repeal it, or if they don't do anything, take any action, then it actually becomes a law. Is that correct, or is that just a misnomer?
No, I don't think that doesn't sound right to me. No. I'm not a lawyer. If there's a lawyer in town, they could order in the room here. They could.
I've never heard of that happening because legislature passes a law and they direct whatever state agency to then go and implement that law. A lot of times laws are very broad-based, and it's like, well, how exactly do we implement it? So that was the whole purpose for developing rules, is to, like, okay, how are we actually going to implement that law?
So I think we need to get a vote of the group here. We came prepared to also talk about the Little Spokane if you want to.
What time is it?
Prefer to just sort of follow along in this conversation about the Spokane. We can do that. We can continue to answer questions on that, or we could talk a little bit about Little Spokane. What would you folks like to do?
Little Spokane water banking. That'd be great.
There'll be plenty of this, more information, so some terrific questions. There'll be plenty more information that's going to be coming out, and you'll have lots of places to go.
PowerPoint presentation, is it included? Did we get through that?
Yeah, that was everything.
Okay. Well, let's say we got to decide, because we got 3 hands up. Do we want to go Little Spokane or keep answering questions? Which one do we want to do?
Water banking.
Okay, then we're going to cut the questions off for now, and Russ is going to talk about the Little Spokane. Now this flat map, the last map that we haven't talked about, the pink one, that is the map of the...
Does everybody have one?
Does anyone need one? You can ask, did I take yours? Did I take yours?
So while Brooke and other folks are kind of passing those out, I did not prepare any kind of PowerPoint presentation about a water bank in the Little Spokane. And that's partly because we're still at the stage of looking at whether or not a water bank might work in the Little Spokane. And so what we Ecology have done under the watershed planning is to give the county a grant to do a feasibility study to see if a water bank would work.
What's a water bank?
Good question. What's a water bank? So that's what the whole water bank question is about, is, you know, what would a water bank do? What would it look like? What kind of structure would it have? The legislature passed a law about 5 years ago that authorized water banks to be developed in Washington State. The first one was for Yakima, but it was only for Yakima. And then they decided, because there are other people who are interested in the idea of a water bank, and so they made it a broader law that would allow other people to develop water banks, sometimes called exchanges. The basic idea is that in a lot of places, say where you have development and then you have other larger rights, to go and transfer one large right into lots of small ones can be a real challenge. And there are places where people don't have enough water, or they don't have enough legal water because there isn't much there. But there are people who have large water rights, and they might be willing to sell either part or all of their water right. So the idea is one party can put water into a bank, you know, same idea as a money bank, but you put the water in the bank and then other people can take it out. But there are so many different ways that they can work. People can donate their water into a bank. They can sell their water into their bank. They can lease it. They can also, in part, determine how that water gets used. You can donate your water into the water bank and then also take it back out at a later date. So how they operate, the structure behind them, it's really up to how it gets designed. It has to be consistent with existing state water law. So there still has to be extent and validity tests on the water that goes in so that it's valid water that's being put in, like so water that hasn't been relinquished, then it can be taken out. And set up a process that really reduces a lot of all the transaction costs, because it can take a long time to do an extent and validity test and make sure that the water that is going to be put in the bank is coming out of, you know, this bucket of water over here, and it needs to be put into, generally speaking, used in that same bucket of water. Yeah.
How is that different than like the cap and trade idea when you buy and exchange, you know, for small companies, big companies that have all the, I mean, how's that different? I'm just not sure.
You know, I don't know enough about cap and trade to try and compare the two things.
A little bit, so I just wondered.
It's a good question. I'm totally not capable of answering it though.
So can we backtrack a second first, Dave? Just explain why we think we need a water bank. You want to go with it?
Sure. So in the Little Spokane, there are parts of the Little Spokane that are closed to new appropriations of water. And there are some larger water rights in the basin. And some of those might not be used, or someone may decide that they don't want to keep using their water. Maybe they want to sell it. Maybe they want to put it in trust. Maybe they want to put it in for in-stream flow. Maybe they want to lease it. Lots of different options for what they can do with it. And in the Little Spokane, there are some places where you can legally get water, but there isn't any physical water actually there. And that's a real challenge, because a lot of people are drilling wells and they're coming up with lots of dry holes, and often they're trying to hook up into water systems. The water purveyors that are out there are having a challenge of trying to deliver farther and farther out in more and more rural communities, so it gets more expensive per house to try and provide that water. We think that there's some possibility of developing a water bank that will facilitate that transfer of valid water rights from people who have them to people who want them. It's not something that we are doing. We're not making a water bank. We are not creating it. We are providing the county with some funds to study it, do a feasibility study. What would a water bank look like? How would it work? Who would operate it? Are there valid water rights that could go into the bank? How many people out there are wanting water in that area? How much might they be willing to pay for some water? And so it just facilitates basically a marketplace of water and allows those water transfers to take place. So we don't have an answer. It's not something that we are proposing to do. But we think it might help the people in the Little Spokane watershed be able to get water so that they can develop in places in the future where they might not otherwise be able to because there isn't water available. So that's the basic idea behind it.
One little correction there is that we have, since we issued those 150 water rights I talked about before in Little Spokane that were junior to the Little Spokane rule that was passed in 1976, we issued 150 water rights, and then we decided no more. We're not even going to provision anymore. So we've denied about 35, 40 water rights in the Little Spokane in the last, we denied about 20 or 25 of them a couple years ago, and about 8 or 10 years before that we denied them. There were applications for new rights. We said no, there's no water available. One person that appealed went to the Environmental Hearings Board that we go to for our decisions, and the board took the Ecology side and agreed with Ecology's decision that there was not the water available to issue new water rights. And so there's no way to get new water. And you need to also understand the distinction here between what we've been talking about with the Spokane, which is a basin that is served almost exclusively by municipal water providers, and the Little Spokane, where there aren't hardly any municipal water suppliers. There's Stevens PUD serves water up there. Probably Deer Park has a municipal right. The big purveyor there is Whitworth Water District. They have water rights both in where the Spokane Aquifer hits the Little Spokane. The Whitworth Water District is lucky to have water. They have wells in both the Spokane Aquifer and in the Little Spokane Aquifer. So they have water rights. They've been pushing water as people like up on Green Bluff and those sort of places. Their wells have been going dry. They're actually pumping their aquifers dry. They have, when they get requests, they do push up into those areas. It's got to meet kind of their rules, their limitations as to whether they serve water or not. It's entirely the Whitworth Water District's decision whether they serve water to somebody or not. But they even said, I mean, there's places that we just met with them last week and we were talking about this, that in the recent past they've had as many as 100 water users in the Little Spokane drainage that have dry wells, and they won't serve up into because it's just too expensive to serve a home or two way up a drainage. So the Whitworth Water District has like a gas station for water, and they have a well, and they've had as many as 100 water users come in, fill up their tanks, take it up to their house, put it in their tank. And so there are areas in Little Spokane where there just flat out isn't any water in the ground, and it doesn't matter if we gave you the biggest piece of paper in the world, you still don't have any water. So they're very different, distinct aquifers and basins, and with very distinct problems. Southwest McCart, he's got very similar problems up in the Caldwell Basin, where he's got a few more municipal providers, but he's got that problem of those people, rural water use way up in tributaries that it's very difficult to drive water up to.
I have attended some of your water advisory availability meetings, and when Stephen Neugebauer came over to Spokane and spoke, he was specifically talking about using technology, a type of technology that the Department of Ecology has not really used, and it is available to examine deep into the surface of the water. And I think he was the earth further north of Spokane, north of the aquifer. So not looking for aquifers underneath the aquifer, but going further north where Whitworth is the main purveyor. They're sending the water out to these people, and I spent hours, I thought it was fascinating, reading. Whitworth is irritated. They just don't want to provide all this water. And there was a group of us that actually went up to, was it Colbert? And we saw that there was contaminated wells there, you know, in the dump up in the Colbert area, and they actually removed, how much water do you remember, Connie?
1,000 gallons, almost 1,000 gallons a minute, wasn't it?
No, more than that.
Million per day.
Million per day.
1 million gallons per day right there near the dump, and then they dump it back into the river. So there is quite a bit of water. Of course, that was contaminated with Fairchild was dumping their barrels and things.
It was
That was a
Colbert landfill.
Colbert landfill.
And their recharge is like half an hour.
Instantaneous.
So how do you extract 1 million gallons of clean water and have recharge within a half an hour? That's incredible. How do they not have water in the Little Spokane where they're putting it back in?
Well, but the point I agree with you, but the point I want to make is that there is technology. So for us to just say flat out there's no water, it's kind of like we're using 1950 x-ray machines. We need to upgrade. Let's use the new modern techniques that Stephen Neugebauer has suggested. We should spend the money to investigate, because if people want to live up there and choose to live up there, then we should make sure that they have the technology to examine underneath the earth to know if there's the water that's available, instead of just saying, oh, there's no water, you guys can't live up here. Because Whitworth is not going to, they don't want to extend their lines any further. So I thought that would be my suggestion.
Well, it's perfectly legal. I mean, we're not, in Department of Ecology, not telling you you can't drill deeper. You can drill deeper or wherever you want to do. On your property, you can drill and look for water. We're just telling you that there are a lot of property owners who simply flat out don't have any water anymore, and they're having to rely upon either Whitworth serving them with their pipes or some sort of water depot.
But Stephen has suggested to us that you can drill a hole here, and then go over just a few hundred feet, or maybe even a few feet, and there will be water. So these aquifers are sort of buried, and they're not, they're not like the Spokane aquifer.
Well,
so
some of that may also be that, when you're looking at bedrock, which generally speaking pretty solid, doesn't really hold water. So you can drill as much as you want straight through rock, and all you're going to get is rock. There are fractures and fissures in the rock, and that's where water will accumulate. And so, yeah, sometimes you can drill down and either hit a crack or follow a crack down, and you can get water. Yeah. But that would explain why, right here you can't get it, and 5 feet over you can. That's why water witches.
It's very much it's not like Spokane where it's all continuous, it all flows together. It's all one big pool of water. We see that on the West Plains. You've probably heard some of the stuff, the horror stories, the early heights it's gone through, and it's the same way out there. They have little isolated buckets of water, and some places there's a lot of water, and other places there's none. And then out there, the quantity of water they're using, they can suck the water out of that little bucket pretty fast, and it'll all be gone by the middle of the summer. So we've had to work with folks out there to try and keep the water supply moving on the West Plains. We got this gentleman way in the back.
Yeah, I've spoken with Steve Neugebauer and also another hydrologist and also a geological engineer. And I'm very concerned because I'm seeing DOE making all kinds of rules and things in all different places. And candidly, you've been mandated since 1976 to start making these rules and things such as that. But what I have been told by these hydrologists is you have not done the proper studies to actually determine how much water there is and where. And what I've also been told by these individuals is that you're using a precautionary method rather than a scientific method of rulemaking. And normally, as these individuals have told me, these precautionary methods are designated for emergency situations. And I wish that I could remember the name of the sorts of studies that they said is available to be done that DOE has not done. But I'm very concerned hearing you make rules and you really don't know how much their water there is and so on.
You're absolutely right. We know very little about groundwater in most places. And the exception in our region goes from Canada to Oregon, Idaho to the Columbia River. We got 13 counties. In our region, I can tell you we have really, really good studies done on the Spokane Aquifer, Spokane-Rathdrum Aquifer, the Palouse, Pullman, Moscow Basin Aquifer, the Odessa Aquifer, which is the one out in the basin that's declining at 10 feet a year, has been for 30 years. There's hundreds of millions of dollars being spent to get water into that aquifer. We have some pretty good data on the West Plains Aquifer out there, Heights, Fairchild. But outside of those, we have a pretty good study. The little Spokane now with the USGS just did a study there. We have a pretty good handle there. We
what are the studies that you're saying that you've done?
Pardon me?
What are the studies that you've done?
There are groundwater studies. There are studies of the,
what are they called?
The aquifers. Well, the one in Spokane is called the Spokane-Rathdrum Bi-State Aquifer Study, and it's been vetted. I can tell you that one's probably the best study we have in the entire state. Been vetted by virtually everybody, that who's who of water users, the USGS, the two states, all the water purveyors have looked at this data. The county, this is one that's very well studied. But you're right. For the most part, most places we don't have that kind of detailed information.
I think what they're getting at very simply if you were in the oil exploration business, doing it the way you're doing it, we wouldn't have any oil wells. They've gone way beyond 1955, 56, when they were in this region and did some work, where they used magnetic resonancing and the other procedures. Mr. Neugebauer made it clear, he said for about $300,000 to $400,000 you could basically map where the water is in this area. The technology is now available. Everything I'm hearing that you're doing, and I'm not critical of what you're doing, is based on what you know, where the wells have been drilled and what have you. Nobody's gone in to look and see, well, what else is there, if there's anything else, and where can we find it? If we do something like this, it could make it a lot easier for people buying land. They're going to know, well, we know there's water here, and we know for sure. You'll find water 5 miles down. You see my point?
Yeah, your point's well taken, but it's...
Why can't we do this? We spend millions of dollars in the county in studies and all that, but we won't spend any money to go find out what's out there. And the technology is now available.
You need to take that up with your legislators, because we're always arguing for what you're arguing for. We want more data, more information, more studies that we can get.
You would support an effort?
Absolutely, we do all the time. We're always fighting to try to get more and more studies done, but it's difficult to get that kind of... And also understand that to do a detailed study of an aquifer requires an enormous number of wells, an enormous number of boreholes.
That's one technology, something that you used maybe 30, 40 years ago. We have other technologies now. Right. Why do you think natural gas is being found the way it is? I mean, well, they're using the technologies that people that are in the water business don't use at all.
Well, maybe we can convince Exxon to start doing water studies.
They might get some money.
But and also getting back at the other point, which I think is a really good one, which is the places where we are doing rulemaking. I mean, because we have a mandate to do in-stream flow rules, right? That's a mandate that the legislature gave us. So we don't usually do rulemaking in places where we don't have the information, because it's hard to make a decision about it. Where we have information that says, okay, there isn't water here or there is water there, and some of those kind of things, where we can fulfill our mandate to do a rule to protect senior water users, to keep water, to keep enough water in the stream so that there's some fish and people can go rafting and swimming and all the standard things people like to do in the water, then it makes sense to pursue doing a rule that accomplishes that, a water management rule. Where we don't have the data, we usually don't pursue doing any kind of rulemaking.
I would say that we are using those techniques you're talking about out on the West Plains. Rob, what all have they done out there? There's magnetics and all sorts of stuff.
Well, we've done a variety of geophysical studies out there trying to identify, trying to find the contact between the basalt out there where the water is found in the cracks and the fissures, and then the underlying granite. The finding is that it's a very similar rock type, and so identifying the difference between the granite and the basalt is difficult using typical geophysical methods, but we did find that seismic was probably the best way to go, and we've done a variety of seismic surveys out there, and there's more study going on now.
And I would just say regarding that question of, well, if you don't have enough data, what do you do? Well, we're stuck in the middle as a regulatory agency because we have half the people, and I don't know what the numbers are, but some of the people saying if you don't know enough, then continue to issue water rights and don't write rules. And then you have other people saying if you don't know enough, then don't make a mistake by issuing more water. And a good example of that is the West Plains, where they were doing fine until about the late 90s, and then we issued a water right to City Medical Lake, and they went in on remember the road just off the freeway out there, put in a big municipal well, started pumping, groundwater levels started dropping. And then 2 years, 3 years later, the city of Beverly Heights came in and put a well a quarter mile away from that well and started pumping. Water levels were dropping 20 to 30 feet. The water table dropped about 150 feet in that area. And the city of Beverly Heights ended up having to drill people's wells deeper and get them water supply and stuff. So we never know. The hard part for us is when we don't have data, we never know which water right is going to tip us over the scale and put us into a place where you're now impairing existing water rights. You're right. I mean, you have to have data, but the expense of gathering enough data to make absolutely. Fine-tuned decisions every time is so big that there's just not enough money out there. So we kind of have to spend that money in small areas to make it worthwhile.
The total water withdrawn from the Spokane Aquifer, the 18 purveyors represent what percentage of the water being withdrawn? Are they like 10% or 90%? Or?
I would guess that most of the water is being pulled out of private municipal providers in big industry like Kaiser Turnwood.
But private wells are withdrawing very little.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the total quantity, if you put all the... Well, number one, there aren't all that many permanent exempt wells on the aquifer footprint. I don't know the number, but and Rob might. Rob is kind of.
Honestly, I don't know how many permits there are.
But you're right. It's got to be the number for private use has got to be a small percentage.
Rob, well, two things. Number one, I want to confirm, Keith, that this rule would not affect the ability of a homeowner to drill a permanent exempt well on their property. They're in the watershed, but they're up on the hillside, either up toward Micah and up, Highway 27, out that area, or up, up on Pleasant Prairie, Keon Prairie, in those areas. Greenwood.
Yeah, if you're off the footprint of, if you don't have flood gravels on your property, and we know pretty well where that line, and we can tell you within the width of this room probably in most places, then you don't, the rule does not apply to you.
Do you have maps available on your website where you can go and actually map your property and see if you fall within the footprint or not?
Yes, but even those maps are, and ultimately if we go out on the ground and let's say our line was over there and you couldn't come over on this side of that line based on our map, if you came over here and you drilled and you're in gravel, then you're in. So there's a bit of uncertainty about exactly where.
Yeah, we haven't mapped the exact, down to the, inch, like exactly where
I'm talking about like maybe parcel. If you have, could you go map it by a parcel number?
Right. Well, and there's the whole aspect of if you want to put a well on your own property, drill it, maintain it, do all those things, and you're not in the aquifer, because you'll know as soon as you start drilling whether you're in the aquifer or not. So if you're in the aquifer, then you're subject to the rule, but that doesn't even necessarily mean you can't drill a well. But you're still also within a water purveyor service area. There's only a handful of parcels in the entire aquifer that don't actually currently have service from a water purveyor.
But if you're not in that aquifer, then
you're not in it.
It does not apply for you. If
Right.
you drill a well and you're in solid rock right off the bat, the rule doesn't apply. But that's the good news. The bad news is you're probably not going to get much water.
Yeah.
Once you're in the rock, you're outside, like Rusty said, if you hit a fracture, you luck out. But for the most part, there's a reason there aren't big developments off the aquifer around here, and that's because there is not water physically available on the ground. You go drill a well and get no water. So I can give you the national drilling. I'm sorry? That's what national drilling is. Yeah, there you go.
Well, is everybody...
Well, let's see, there's one more.
Yeah,
Or two.
Everything that you're hearing is about wells. Someone lives on the Spokane River, and you have plenty of water. What about the concerns about your normal irrigation on your property? Is there anything that's going to have drones overhead looking at what the runoff is into the river?
No,
is that any concern in this?
Legislature hasn't given us money for drones yet.
I can't hear you.
Legislature hasn't given us money for drones yet, so no.
I'm joking, but
I have drones. No, well, number one, if you're pulling water out of the river, send me your address because you're probably illegal. Because I don't know of any.
Nothing infecting runoff into the river.
No, the runoff to the river is.
And if you're in within a city boundary or you're getting your water from a municipal provider, you can use as much as you want. You just if you start using a huge amount of it, you might just have to start paying more for it, whatever their water rates are. But that's between you and them.
About surface waters, there aren't any surface water. Nobody pulls surface water out of Spokane River for use. Only Avista uses it for non-consumptive power generation. But we don't have anybody. Kaiser Trentwood used to have a surface water right. They converted over to wells, and they're sort of in direct continuity with the river. But we really don't have people pulling water out of the river for use.
What are you guys going to have? A lot of these folks came to discuss like cattle operations, farming operations, Hangman Creek, Deep Creek, so on and so forth. When are you guys going to have a talk about that?
Well, you'll just need to contact our water quality. I'm in the Water Resources Program. Rusty's in sort of both our Shorelines program and he helps us Water Resources. We don't have the authority. That program's water quality. So if you want that kind of discussion, you should. I'll get you the contact information to talk to our water quality people and come have that conversation. But neither one of us are smart enough to talk about that.
Just kind of a basic question. With all these grandfathered in water rights, and plus all the other water rights on paper that they can draw, do you think your rule would really be beneficial or effective?
Well, again, the point of the rule is not to stop existing water use. It won't apply to those people. And we're aware that if those water rights on paper are exercised, that the situation will get worse. There will be more water pulled out, and there will be more impact to the river. So the intent of the rule is not to save the river, save the aquifer. It's to stop any future withdrawals that's not already been authorized. And so the rule, again, is more about getting standing for the river in any sort of legal proceedings that down the line. And so we hope that, like I said before, we hope to not get in a situation with the Little Spokane where we issue new water rights. The applications we have on file, we already know we've got more water going to be used, so we're going to deny those. So it's not like we're trying to take water away from anybody. We can't. The state laws don't allow us. I know there's some misunderstanding out there that Ecology goes around taking people's water rights away. We don't do that. We can't do that. The law's clear. Anything, in this case, anything that's a senior right that existed prior to the rule that's being passed is not affected by this rule.
What about the city of Spokane and their existing water rights? Where are they as far as using what they have and what do they have banked?
City of Spokane uses about 70,000 acre feet a year currently, and they've got another 70,000 acre feet of water, paper water rights. They probably got the biggest paper water right in the state, I would guess.
There's another question.
There's a ton of water available for future growth through the city of Spokane.
Thank you.
Cindy, I don't know if you want to cut us off or it's getting close.
Maybe one more question back there?
What, they tell it, if you don't use your water right, you lose it, so why hasn't the city lost theirs and give it to agriculture?
So I explained before, the municipal water law. Municipal water law sort of provides a special protection for, it's for the growing of communities in the future. And so the legislature felt in 2003 that it was important to make sure that cities had adequate water supply for future growth. And so they gave them kind of this special protection and allowed them to have this water but they still have to be continually growing into it. We actually have a challenge right now that's facing the court's already heard it. State Supreme Court heard a case on WSU's water rights. You might have heard the Cornelius case. They have about 5,000 acre feet of water in their portfolio, and they've only used 2 or so. And there's a challenge to whether that additional water that they haven't used yet is still good. And it's going to have a profound effect on all municipalities in the state of Washington, depending on how that Supreme Court decision comes out. But right now, the municipalities are protected by that municipal water law.
Is livestock, is that the same then for 1945 if some of these people haven't used the livestock water, is it gone? Or they're still,
No, I mean, if you have livestock and they're on your ground, stock are allowed to use whatever water they need for their personal use, personal hygiene and stuff. So drinking, you've got cows spraying water on and stuff, keep them cool. That's all under the stock water exemption.
And it's unlimited for stock water.
Well, it's unlimited in the sense it can only be for however much the cow uses.
Doesn't that go back to Easter Day's suit with the Lotus Ski Block?
Yes.
And basically, that's a domestic well, and they're watering 24,000 head of cattle.
Yep, exactly.
So they would exceed the 5,000 gallon per day exemption for, domestic use, but they ruled that it's unlimited for stock. Yep.
Yeah, that again was a state decision.
Well, we're getting close to our wrap-up time, and the guys will be up here to ask questions. Write on your cards. Make sure you sign up if you want more information about the hearings that are going to be occurring over the next year. And I just want to say, if you have worries about the future, you've heard them say the legislative positions, and we do elect our judges in Washington State. So we need to really watch out for who we elect for legislature, because those are the guys that, mandate these guys, and our judges. We elect our judges. A lot of states don't, but we do. So we need to really be careful who we elect and ask questions when we go to these forums for the candidates. Thank you very much for coming, and sign up for CAPR if you want to get more involved.